Welcome, friends. This is Pastor Bob, and it's time for our midweek message. And I want to talk a little bit today about the new direction we're going to go with the midweek message. And namely, it's going to be exploring the Bible, learning more about the Bible. And the reason for that is a couple reasons. First, we started a new study here on Wednesdays at 6 that is just about the Bible, making sense of the Bible today. And we're going to start doing a verse-by-verse look at Colossians starting this week on Sundays. And over the last few years, I've learned that people really want to know about the Bible. Studies have shown overwhelmingly, whether it's Barna or Hartford Institute of Religious Research or even some Pew studies, that most practicing Christians have never read the Bible. And that's not surprising. We live in an era where people specialize. I was reading a statistic now that the average family will move 11 times from the beginning of their career to the end of their career. And the reason for that is because we are so highly specialized. A lot of people are anyway. And if you want to change jobs, you may have to move to a different town or city. Everybody learns their trade or their skill, and that's what they do for 10, 11, 12 hours a day. I don't know many people who work 8 hours a day still. There are some, but most people, that's what they pour into, so they become experts in their field, leaving very little time to learn about other fields like theology or the Bible or the spiritual. And so any way I can help people learn more about those things, because there's certainly a hunger, both inside the church and outside the church. There's a hunger to know about the Bible, what it says, why it was written, when it was written, who the audience was, all of that. And so what we're going to start doing with our midweek message is digging into the Bible, the books of the Bible, some of the neat passages, and really touching on that each week to help people in their own spiritual journey, especially busy people who may not have the time to indulge in deep study on their own. So that being said, I know there's going to be a couple questions, and we'll go ahead and address those today. The first I know a lot of people are going to ask is, which Bible should I use? I want to start reading the Bible, want to start maybe some routine. Which one should I use? Because if you go to the bookstore or where most people go, Amazon, I don't know if there's many bookstores left, but you're going to see a whole bunch of different Bibles. So let me try to narrow that down a little bit for you. As far as Bibles, the word Bible is just a Greek word for book. The actual word for this collection of books we call the Bible is called canon. But if you're doing a search on Amazon, you're going to use Bible. You'll notice that there are different kinds. We, as Protestants, use the Protestant Bible, which is the 66 books of the Old and New Testament. But as you're scrolling through, you'll notice that there are some that will say Old and New Testament plus Apocrypha. Well, the Apocrypha means that is a Catholic Bible. The Catholic Bible has a few more books than the Protestant Bible. They include like 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Tobit, Sirah, Bella Dragon, some other books that we do not include. Now, if you're looking through, you'll probably find a Greek Orthodox Bible. They have a few more books than even the Catholic does. And if you're really digging around and you find an Ethiopian Bible, they've got even a few more. But most of us, at least in Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopal, Reformed, non-denominational, most of Protestant Christians are going to use the 66 books of the Old and New Testament in the Bible that is sold in most stores. So that's what I would stick with. Now, if you wanted to go with the Catholic Bible or the Eastern Orthodox and read those books as well, nothing wrong with it. It's just that Protestants don't consider those extra books, which are either called the Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha. We do not consider those books as authoritative as the Catholics do or the Eastern Orthodox. It's not that big of a deal. It's just some have a few more books that they consider important that Protestants de-emphasize. It's not that they're not important, we just de-emphasize them. We don't put them at the same level as Scripture. So then the next question is, which translation do I go with? Because there's multiple translations, and the different translations were written with a different purpose in mind. So just to give a few that you might know off the top of your head, we'll start with like the King James Version. The King James Version isn't really used anymore. It was one of the first English translations. It wasn't the first. There was the Bishop's Bible and the Tyndale Bible. Matter of fact, the King James Bible is just a rehashed Bishop's Bible. King James wanted to commission a new Bible. He wanted to spin it a little bit. He wanted it to reflect the divine right of kings and be very pro-monarchy. There was some issues with it, even with the language. One of the criticisms at the time the King James Bible was written was even then the language was dated. It wasn't the way people spoke. So anyway, it grew in popularity in America. That's about it. The rest of the world, not so much. But in America, it grew in popularity, and people like it because of the poetic language, the outdated language. I can't imagine reading the 23rd Psalms without throwing a little bit of King James language in there, so I get it. But as far as scholarship goes, it's not great. There's 3 places where it mentions unicorns. There's other places where it mentions behemoths. Why is that? Well, you had a bunch of scholars in the 17th century reading the Hebrew describing animals from the Middle East. They had no clue what those animals were. What's an animal with horns? Oh, it must be a unicorn, so that's what they put. They had no idea. And the reality is, just like they didn't know what certain animals were, they didn't know what some certain words meant, they didn't know what certain translations meant. So it was good for the time, but it certainly would not be considered a good translation today. Not as far as accuracy goes or a reflection of modern scholarship. Not so great. A couple of popular Bibles would be like the NIV. That's the New International Version. That comes out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, a publisher called Zondervan, which is pretty well respected. It does reflect a lot of the modern scholarship. It does have an ease of reading. The downside is they do come from a right-wing spin. Now, admittedly, the scholars knew their biases and tried to work some of that out and did footnote some of that, but it's still there and you'll notice it. And so if that's your thing, fine. You just need to be aware of it, because when you get into some of the more controversial passages, you got to know where they're starting from in order to understand how they came up with the resultant translation that we today call the NIV. There are some other popular ones. Eugene Peterson has one that's really popular called The Message. There's a Living Bible, good for easy reading. NRSV, NASB are both great Bibles for academic study. They also come from a particular perspective. The downside to the NRSV and the NASB is that because they try to come off the literal Greek, which does not flow like English does, they're a little harder to read. So if you're planning on using the Bible for public reading, probably not the best choice, because it will not flow like modern language does, at least not as well as some of the other translations. One of my favorite Bibles for personal reading is the Common English Bible. That one tries to be as neutral as possible, meaning it's not coming from a right wing or a left wing starting point, putting that spin with certain passages. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of the words coming out of the Greek, even with all the scholarship we have today and all the manuscripts and everything, a lot of words and phrases we don't quite know what they mean. And so translators have to put together a best guess. Well, if they're coming from the right wing end or the left wing end, that's going to affect the way they approach their work. And so the Common English Bible is pretty neutral. It's a good translation and it's easy to read. But I'll be honest with you, any Bible that you like, that you want to start reading, most folks are just reading it for the spiritual component and to learn more about God and His people. They're not getting into it academically. They're not looking at developing big theological arguments about some hot button social issue. They're not trying to, use it for anything other than some home study. And so most Bibles you find will be pretty good. So any Bible you find, you probably have one laying around the house. I would encourage you to dig in and you can start today. Make it a routine every day if you want a good place to start. I would definitely start in the New Testament, Next week I'll explain why, but I would start with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and go from there. And what we'll do here each week with this video is really kind of work our way through the Bible and the different books and what they were written for and who the audience was and some key passages, and go a little bit deeper together. All right, thank you guys and have a great weekend. I'll see you Sunday.